We'll discuss some Inyane Tzit Tzit and specifically Inyane Techelles. Whether we have a mitzvah today of putting Techelles on our Tzit Tzit. So to go back, the Torah tells us there's a mitzvah of Tzit Tzit, and when we had the Chilaz, when we had the Techelles, there was a mitzvah to put Techelles on our Tzit Tzit. In fact, the Rabbi, he said we're getting close to the time of the Mashiach, so what's going to happen is they're going to build the Mashiach, they're going to build the Beis HaMikdash. The Mashiach's going to come, and that'll be a question of whether the Beis HaMikdash comes down Be'eshi Bana, like Rashi, like the Rambam. We're going to build up, but there's going to be a Beis HaMikdash, and then they're going to have to start figuring out how to make the Techelles for the Big Day Kahuna, because for the Big Day Kahuna, that's a prerequisite. In order to wear the Big Day Kahuna, it has to have Techelles on it. However, that's by the Big Day Kahuna, Techelles is Ma'akev. What about by the mitzvah of Tzit Tzit is Techelles Ma'akev? So that's a machokas in the Mishnah whether Techelles Ma'akev is Alavan or not. So we paskin, no, Rebbe sheet is, it is, and that's the way the Baal HaMor paskins. Apparently the Baal HaMor didn't wear tzitzis his whole life because he paskin there was no mitzvah of wearing tzitzis because we don't have any Techelles, and if we don't have any Techelles, we don't have any mitzvah of tzitzis. And so the Radvina Rebbe sent a letter to many of the Gedolim during his time. He claimed he found the Techelles. So he wrote a letter to the Gedolim of his time to find out whether they agree with him or disagree. So many disagreed, but a couple agreed. So there's a famous letter, apparently from the Beis Halevi. I think it was the person next to him, person close to the Beis Halevi, who responded. But he wrote back to the Radvina Rebbe. He says, if you could prove to me that there's a new issue going on here. In other words, if you're telling me this chilazon, this fish or snail that you claim is a chilazon, it's been around last year, 10 years ago, 100 years ago, 500 years ago. So that means that all the Gedolim knew about it, and it's a de facto Masorah that it's no good. But if you could give me a reason why it's a new issue now, that we just came up with this new chilazon, this new fish, this new snail, if you could prove to me it was a new issue, and that's why no one else before knew about it, I'd be the first one to wear it. I'm going to be the first one to wear it or not. But he said, then I'll be makabel. So that's what he wrote back to the Radvina Rebbe, that if you could prove to me there's something new, then it's good. However, there's different versions of what the Beis Halevi said. The Soloveitchik from Boston, the Soloveitchik family in Yerushalayim, they all say it's not the Pshat in the Beis Halevi. They say, no, the Beis Halevi says that no. That even if you think it is a Techelles, even if you give me a good reason, even if it's good, it's no good. Because he says you can't start a new mitzvah without a Masorah. Since we haven't had the mitzvah of Techelles for so many years, so we need a Masorah to go ahead and bring it back. And even if you're right, you're wrong, kind of like Osasa Small. Even the rabbis tell you left is right is left, you have to listen. So too, that's also what the Aruch HaShulchan writes as well, that to restore a lost mitzvah, you have to have a Masorah. And therefore, since we don't have a Masorah on this Techelles, hence he says, I don't care what you prove, it's a non-starter, you can't use it. So there's two versions of the Beis Halevi. Whether he's saying is, well, it's good if you could give me a good reason why it's a new issue, or no matter what, it's no good. So there's Rav Cohen, who was known for the Badei HaShulchan. He wrote Nida. I think he would have as a tzedakah as well. But he's very close to Rabbi Yosef. He did Shemesh with Rabbi Yosef in Eretz Yisrael, and he came back to America. So he wrote to Shai. I think it was in. He wrote to Shaila to Rav Yosef, and Rav Yosef gave him permission to print it as well. He says, which version do you think of the Beis Halevi is correct? And if you think that it's correct, and depending on which version, so should one wear it or not? So first he says, he thinks the version of the Ravina Rebbe is right. It's a big kiddush to say that you need a Masorah to continue a mitzvah, even if you have all the facts in front of you. He says it's logical to assume that if we know it's a Techelles based on scientific, archaeological level, we're going to figure it out. One can use the Techelles. It's more difficult to say you need a Masorah. Alright, so then if you assume that way, so what about wearing the Techelles? So at the end of the day, he didn't wear it. But he gave some difficult answers. He said, well, because even though now we think it is, but the Rav Herzog and Ravina Rebbe, we know they were proved wrong, so this is going to be proved wrong also. He didn't really go into the issue. But when I say he didn't wear it, so the way Rav Schachter's version goes, he claims that's what the Techelles people told them what happened when they went to Rabbi Yosef. He said, you know what, I think it's right. It is the right one. But what am I going to do? Number one is, how much Techelles do you have? If I make an announcement that this is Techelles, the 20,000 Haredim are going to want to wear tzitzis tomorrow. So number one, if you don't have it, how am I going to do it? And secondly, supply and demand, the price is going to skyrocket, and therefore people don't have money to put the food on the table, going to spend the money on Techelles. So therefore, for other reasons, apparently, according to this version, he did not do it. But now, fundamentally, he agreed with the Ravina's Rebbe interpretation that in theory, even without a Masorah, the Techelles would be okay. So that's a whole major discussion. So if you hold that you need a Masorah, so that's a game ender. But assuming you don't need a Masorah, so what about the following? We know we have a principle in Halacha, Savek Daraisa L'Chumra, Savek D'Rabbanan L'Kula. A dowry regarding a biblical law was strict, a dowry regarding a rabbinical law was lenient. So if Techelles is a suffix, so we should apply the principle of Savek Daraisa L'Chumra. But I'm not sure if it's Techelles, so when in doubt, Savek Daraisa L'Chumra. So therefore, we should wear it anyway, even not B'Torah Zvad, at least B'Torah Suffix. And so why don't we say Savek Daraisa? So Rav Shlomo Miller wrote in a Torah journal, and others point out the same way, based on a Rav Chaim, that when do we say Savek Daraisa L'Chumra? That's only that you have the lulav, the fourth species in front of you, and you're not sure if yours is kosher, but then you want to. But then I say my style would mean them are kosher, so therefore you go ahead and shake mine, but no bracha, Savek Daraisa L'Chumra. That's what I say, and then that'll be it. But if only, so when do we say it's only if the next time, if the doubt is resolved, so then I say Savek Daraisa L'Chumra, and then we take care of it. But if we're not going to resolve the doubt, so therefore we don't say Savek Daraisa L'Chumra. In other words, so in his case with Techelles is not going to be resolved. So therefore he claims we don't apply, according to Rav Chaim, we don't apply the principle of Savek Daraisa L'Chumra here because you can't resolve the doubt. Rav Schechter claims we do say Savek Daraisa L'Chumra, either Rav Chaim. He says Rav Chaim goes against the Ran and Sukkah. The Ran and Sukkah writes, let's say the first day, we know the first day of Sukkah is Ukata Mochem Yom HaRishon, it's a biblical mitzvah to do the Daled Minim. So let's say it's already the first day, it's Ben HaShemashas, what to do? So the Ran says you might as well shake Daled Minim without a bracha. So we see from the Ran that even though you're not sure, it's only going to be a suffix whether you did the mitzvah. Nevertheless, your doubt's not resolved. Nevertheless, we say suffix deraisa or chumrah. So Shlomo Miller and Tabach, no, what are you talking about? Rav Chaim knew the Ran. He's not arguing. Over here, by the case of the Ran with the Lulav, that's it. His pshat is you can't do anymore. It's not that matter with the Yotze or not. I'm shaking ben hashmashos, and now either I'm in or out, but there's nothing more for me to do. So that's when I say Savak Deraisa or Chumrah. But here, by the Techelles, I'm going to have to go out and look again, and look again, so it's not resolved, so therefore I don't say Savak Deraisa or Chumrah here by this Techelles. So that's a machlokas, many people, but the machlokas Rav Shechter and Rav Shlomo Miller regarding whether you say Savak Deraisa or Chumrah here, whether it's Rav Chaim works with the Ran or it's against the Ran. And then Rav Shlomo Miller also says another fundamental machlokas in Rav Shechter is he says, according to me, I don't think it's the real Techelles. So therefore, if a person more than Techelles, so we know we pass Kenagov and Eina Makavis, even when you have Kala'ila and the wrong day, it doesn't take away from the mitzvah. Maybe there's a Pri Magadan, there's a Din Lechatchila, that the beggar should be the same clothes, beggar should be the same color as the Switzerland. That's a Din Lechatchila. Here you're trying to fulfill a mitzvah in Torah. So either way, Rav Shlomo writes, he says, I don't think it's Techelles, so it's not a problem. But according to you, Lashita said that you think this is the real Techelles, so you have a major problem because it's a Machokas Rishonim, Rashi, Rambam, Ravid, how many threads are the Techelles? 1, 2, etc. So he's saying, if the halacha is supposed to put in 2 and you only put 1, it's Baal Tigra. If the halacha is 1 you put in 2, it's Baal Tosef. He says, according to you, you can violate a suffix Baal Tigra, a suffix Baal Tosef. Therefore, let's Rav Shlomo Miller's Taina. And Rav Shechter will argue this the opposite. He says, we have the Techelles and that's it. So according, and the one who wears tzitzis without the Techelles, he's over about Tigra. As the Tzuri Evan writes, any mitzvah that can be filled, you could do lechatchila properly, but yotze b'diavad, that's about Tigra. So you could be zorek on the, you should be zorek on the carbon, let's say on the 4 corners. But if I only do a certain or lesser amount, it's still good b'diavad. So that's about Tigra. So since you could put Techelles on and you don't, and you fulfill your mitzvah without Techelles, so therefore that's about Tigra, according to Rav Shechter. So therefore you have to take a stand. According to Rabbi Miller, if it is Techelles, so then you have a big problem. And you can't wear them because you're getting into an issue about Tosa, about Tigra. And according to Rav Shechter, if it is Techelles and you don't wear them, so then you're violating Baal Tigra. So, it's yesh v'yesh, or some put on tefillin, some don't. Another issue they point out is nichsei ki yehura, that it appears like you're being haughty. Like, all the previous generations didn't put it on, so why all of a sudden now I'm putting it on? So Rav Shechter claims, no, we only find nichsei ki yehura is only if me'ikar adin the halach is it's mutter. Let's say me'ikar adin you could sit in shul, and even the rabbi sits during Kriyas Torah, not the Baruch Hu. But so if you standing up, you're a nobody else. Nichsi ki yehura, it's like you're showing up to Rav, or something which me'ikar adin is mutter. It's only a midas chatzidus, then we say nichsi ki yehura. However, if the halacha requires you to do it, there's no mixing yehura. If it's a din daraisa to put on Techelles, that doesn't make a difference if no one else did. You would have to put it on. So those are some of the issues regarding the issue whether one should wear Techelles or not. Today we'll have to continue later on this topic. We'll discuss some inyane tzitzis. The Torah tells us when one is wearing a 4-cornered garment, he is obligated in the mitzvah of tzitzis. And in fact, this isn't only true if he's wearing a 4-cornered garment. If he's wearing a 5-corner garment, a 6-corner garment, he's also obligated in tzitzis. We assume halacha, but he still only has to put on 4 of the corners. Even if he has a 6-corner garment or a 5, he just has to put on the 4 corners. But nevertheless, it is a beged that is obligated in the mitzvah of tzitzis. And hence it's clear if one is not obligated, if one is not wearing a 4-corner garment, one is not obligated to wear. Tosas and Menachos and the Gemara with Katina. Katina discusses, they say, Katina, what's going on? Mateo, what's wrong with your tzitzis? So the Gemara basically says that it's kind of like a life insurance policy, that you're really not obligated, but B'shas Risko, in the time when God gets steaming and angry, so the wearing the tzitzis will protect you. So tzitzis we see, in that sense, is a unique mitzvah. It's different than the mitzvah of matzah, the mitzvah of tefillin, the mitzvah of daled minim, where it's a mitzvah chiyuvis. The mitzvah of tzitzis is a mitzvah kiyumis, is an optional mitzvah, but if you do it, you fulfill your mitzvah min haTorah. Like Rav Moshe Feinstein writes regarding the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. It was asked, is a whole machlokas, Ramban and the Bali Tosas, whether the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael applies Bizman Hazeh. The Ramban writes, V'orashtem osam yeshavtem bam. Yes, there is a chiyuv to live, to dwell in the land of Israel, even today. And Tosas writes, and he writes during his time, that they are patur because of either Shas Sakana, it was a Sakana's Derachim, it was dangerous to get here, or it was too difficult to keep the mitzvahs hatuyas ba'aretz. After all, what's the whole reason you're going is to fulfill the mitzvahs hatuyas ba'aretz. Of course, the Avnei Nezer, who lived well after the Bali Tosas, about 100 plus years ago, he writes those 2 reasons don't apply today. But either way, it's a machokas, the Ramban and the Bali Tosas. So Rav Moshe has a compromise view. He says there is no chiyuv to move to Eretz Yisrael today, and it doesn't seem to make a difference post 1948 or not. However, if you do go, you get a mitzvah min haTorah. Where else do we find this concept of a mitzvah kiyum? It's the Vilna Gaon who made it famous, because the Torah tells us on Pesach, on one is the Erev Tochu Matzos. The night of Pesach, one has an obligation to eat matzah. And it also says, Sheva Shamim, no, you should eat matzah all 7 days. So which one is it? So the conclusion is, the first night is an obligation, one has to eat matzah, but the rest of the Pesach, if you're going to eat bread, if you're going to have a motzi, it has to be matzah. So you get a kiyum ha-mitzvah. And that's what we find as well. That's the way Rav Soloveitchik explains. There's a famous machlokas, the Rambam and the Ramban, regarding tefillah. Pashas, the Ramban writes that tefillah is only the rice of Eisara during the time of war, etc. And the Rambam holds mitzvah aseh l'spala b'chol yom. The Rambam holds every day there's a biblical mitzvah. So Rav Soloveitchik explained what is in the Kudas HaMachlokas. Everybody agrees the only time tefillah is biblical is the Eisara. The Machlokas, the Ramban is what is considered Eisara. So the Rambam writes every day we have a life of sorrows, everything, we don't know what we're going to be tomorrow, today, next 5 minutes. So everything's Eisara, and therefore you have a chiyuv to daven min haTorah. And the Ramban, where it's more of an external type of Eisara, earthquake, a war. So Rav Soloveitchik is pointing, even though the Ramban, let's say when it's not the Eisara, holds that the chiyuv of tefillah is only d'Rabbanan. However, even the Ramban agrees that if you actually daven, when you actually daven, you get a kiyum min haTorah, you get a biblical fulfillment of the mitzvah. So we find this concept. So tzitzis is in this more unique camp where it's a conditional mitzvah. If I'm wearing a four-cornered garment, I am obligated. And if not, I'm not, but it's still a good idea. So there's a machlokas in the Gemara in Menachos, which is a machlokas Rishonim, which is a machlokas the Machaber versus the Ramah on what beged. So clearly, if you're wearing a four-cornered garment, you are chayiv in the mitzvah of tzitzis, min haTorah. What type of garment do you have to be wearing, and what type of material? So one opinion is it has to be beged. It has to be, for our purposes, a wool, beged or pishtan, but for our purposes, a wool beged is chayev min haTorah. And the other opinion is afilu shar begadim, even a cotton beged. So as I said, the machlokas in the Gemara, the Rishonim, so the Machaber paskins that min haTorah it has to be wool. And midrabanan, if you're wearing a cotton four-cornered garment, you have to put on. And the Ramah says no. Even a four-cornered cotton garment, one is obligated, and one fulfills the mitzvah min haTorah of tzitzis. And interesting, Rav Moshe has in many of his tshuvas, and it's a famous picture of Rav Moshe in the Catskills wearing his talis katan over his shirt, but the tal in the summer, and he's wearing a wool talis katan. He writes, Bali nefesh should be machmir to wear a talis katan, but however, yesh v'yesh, the Vilna Gaon Shita, I think the Chazon Ish, the practice in Bnei Brak, is that they wear cotton, because that's what the Gra did. Why did the Gra wear a cotton beged? Why not wear wool? So there's different schools of thought. One school of thought is, it has nothing to do with the mitzvah of tzitzis, it was a chumrah and hilchas shatnez, that since some of the shirts they wore were, let's say, made out of linen, pishtan, and if they put a woolen, even though min haTorah has to be woven together, it has to be part of the beged, one on top of another is an asa, but the Gra was machmir that even not to have the talis katan, the wool talis katan touching the linen shirt, so he wore a kan. They say Rabbi Maisa with the stipe wore, I think he was going out on a date, but he had to travel by train, but there was a big issue, he was concerned about shatness on the seat, so he stood up the whole time, he fell asleep, etc., but it was a chumrah and hilchas shatnez. So either way, that is the opinion of the Machaber, that you need a woolen beged to be chayev, and the opinion of the Ramah is even shar begadim, so by a talis gadol, everybody, I haven't seen anyone not wear wool. Everyone has a woolen talis gadol. That seems to be the accepted minhag. Regarding a talis katan, yesh v'yesh, or those who are machmer to wear. If you're Sephardi, there's more reason to be machmer. Maybe not being machmer according to the Machaber, that's the halacha. If you're Sephardi, there's a greater reason for you to wear a woolen talis katan as well. If you're Ashkenaz, where Moshe seems to think you should, the Vilna Gaon and others didn't, so yesh v'yesh, different minhagim. What about not wool, not cotton, but let's say a synthetic material? You have a four-quartered synthetic material, would you be chayev in tzitzis? So the Gemara talks about, there's one type of material that a tzitzis is putter. If it's a beged shell, or if it's a beged made out of leather, so then one is exempt. And why is it pashas? Because it's just a strip. There's not woven. The woof, in order to be considered a beged, you need a riga. So there's a further machlokas, Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank and Rav Moshe Feinstein, regarding, let's say you take a synthetic sheetim and then you do make it into a garment, you do a riga. So I believe, I could be mixing up the names, but I believe Rav Moshe writes, you're exempt from the mitzvah of tzitzis. That no, it doesn't make a difference. The beged was putter and that's it. And Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank says that no, you are chayav. So those are the mesh tzitzis. So therefore it's best, since it's a machlokas achronim, on whether you could wear this nylon type beged, so it's a shaila, so it's best obviously to avoid the shaila and not wear it, but if you do, so then you have 3 Pesach franc to be somach on. So that is the issue. So we covered, so everyone agrees a wool beged is chayev in tzitzis. A kan is a machokas yishona, machokas machaber ramah. Everyone agrees a beged shor is pater, but if you take a synthetic material, then you weave it, so then it seems to be a machokas from Moshe or Sipazavag, whether it's a din of a beged and whether one is chayev in tzitzis. Is a whole shaila about what about a 4-cornered blanket. Would a 4-cornered woolen blanket be chayev in tzitzis? So the minig is, I think they bring down is, if you have one, you should just cut off the 4th quarter, make it a 3-quarter garment, because it seems to be talia when the nature of Isam also, the mitzvah of tzitzis is during the day. So what does that mean, Isam also? So according to the Rambam, literally the mitzvah of tzitzis is in the zman of the day, and the zman halayla there is no mitzvah of tzitzis. And the Rush disagrees and says nothing to do with Yom versus Laila. It has to do with Beged Yom versus Beged Laila. Beged Yom is chayiv and tzitzis, Beged Laila isn't. According to the Rambam, if you're sleeping at night, so it's not an issue. But if you wake up in the morning and it's daytime, so then you should be chayiv in tzitzis. According to the Rush, the blanket is a Beged Laila, so therefore it should be exempt. So, either way, the minig seems to be that I haven't seen anyone put tzitzis on a 4-cornered woolen blanket to shayla. In addition to it, it's a shayla, it's a beged or not. Maybe it's just how it wouldn't be. It's not considered a beged because you're not wearing it. It's just wrapped around you, and therefore there's another reason. Another room, there's room to be Meiko as well. So we have the fundamental machokas, what type of beged. Wool, everyone says the raisa kan machokas, or leather is putter, synthetic, made into a beged, machokas, Rav Sipes Frank, and Ramosha. Regarding the blanket, I think the Magen Avraham is machmir to cut off the third quarter. And that's and also we had a machokas, the Rambam versus the Rash. But it says Re'isam also prat Laila. The Rambam holds it's Yom versus Laila, and the Rash holds no, it's an issue of Beged Yom versus Beged Laila. We'll discuss some inyane tzitzis. So the Torah tells us that if one is wearing a 4-cornered garment, one is obligated to put tzitzis on the garment. And in fact, there's a discussion in the Gemara whether it's a 5-cornered garment or a 6-cornered garment. So it's a machokas in the Gemara whether you have to put corners on each side. We assume even on the 5-cornered garment, it's enough to put on the 4 corners. The question is, what's considered a beged? So it's a machokas in the Gemara, a machokas in the Rishonim. What's the definition of a beged? So one opinion is you need wool or linen. If it's wool or linen, it's minat Torah. You're obligated to mitzvah of tzitzis if you have a 4-cornered garment. But cotton, silk, and other materials, it's only chayav midrabanan. And the other opinion in Gemara is afil al shar begadim. Even on cotton and silk, those are also a biblical mitzvah if you're wearing a 4-cornered garment. So the Mechaber seems to pass in like the wool shita, that only wool is deraisa, wool linen, and we Bnei Ashkenaz follow the Ramah that even cotton. There's a discussion regarding the mitzvah. We know regarding the mitzvah of tzitzis, we know there's a mitzvah when you're wearing a garment. What about if you're not wearing it, just wrapped around you? In other words, by the issur of shatnez, there's an issur of levisha, there's an issur of it's an issur of wearing a shatnez garment. There's also an issur of halah, not to be wrapped in it. The question is, what about tzitzis? Is there a mitzvah if you're just wrapping yourself in some blanket that you're chayiv in tzitzis? In fact, if someone has a four-cornered blanket, wool, is one obligated to put tzitzis on? So pashtus, we assume that no, the mitzvah is only wearing, and not just for wraparound. The Magen quotes the Chumrah that a four-cornered blanket is chayiv in tzitzis. So regarding a night blanket, or a blanket people sleep at night, so the Torah says you're exempt from tzitzis at night, whether at night means, according to the Rambam, just like there's no mitzvah of lulav at night, there's no mitzvah of shofar also, there's no mitzvah of tzitzis, or your pater, or like the Rush writes, beged yom versus beged laila. So according to the Rambam, at night you're exempt, so you're sleeping at night, it's not an issue. And according to the Rush, if you have a beged yom, you're chayiv at night, but here it's a beged laila, so therefore it shouldn't be chayiv anyway, because even if you want to assume the beged was, who says like the blanket is. So the issue is more, let's say you sleep during the day. So would you be mechuyev to no one puts tzitzis on the four-corner blankets. The shaila is, would you be obligated, or would you cut off the fourth corner to make it a three-corner garment? So if it's during the day, so then according to the Rambam Yechayev, but according to the Rush, it's not a beged laila, so you wouldn't be. The Chazon Ish's shita was, if it was a wool, linen, four-cornered blanket, dealing with a deraisa, so then he'd say you should cut off the koshes for shitas to the Magen Avraham and cut off the fourth corner. However, if it's not, if it's just a cotton blanket, so there's no need to be machmir. In fact, the Taz brings down in Hilchos Rosh Hashanah of all places, we know there's halacha that based on the Midrashim, that a chazan, when he says slichas, he has to wear a talis. And the shaila is, many times we say slichas at night, and we know we said you pater from tzitzis at night. So the Taz says that it's a problem if you're going to put your own talis on at night. So according to the Rambam, you pater because it's Laila. But according to the Rush and the Bali Tosas, it's a beged yom, so you'd be chayiv. So what would you have to do then? If you put your own talis on, you have to put it on without a bracha. So the Taz says he doesn't think it's proper that one should put themselves in a situation where they're going to do the mitzvah without the bracha. So they're like, I guess totally different, but similar to the concept of the minig Ashkenaz, that we don't do Birkas Kohanim today. We don't do it on a daily basis. And the Ramah writes, we're not besimcha. So since we're not besimcha, so therefore you don't want to do Birkas Kohanim. So here, if you can't make a bracha, I say, how could you be besimcha without a bracha? And therefore, also not to, so the Taz says, what should a chazan do then? So therefore he says you shouldn't put on your own talis, but either borrow, because the chiyuv on talis is your talis. So you put on someone else's talis, or if you use the shul's talis, have in mind not to acquire it, and therefore it won't be an issue. That's what the Taz says. You want to avoid the problem of putting on a talis without having to make a bracha. And it's a further machlokas in terms of material between Rashi Pesach Frank and Rav Moshe. The Gemara talks about beged sha'or. If it's a leather sheet, so we know you put them in that tzitzis. So the Gemara doesn't say why the pashas, because it's not woven. there's no ariga. So the shaila is, what if I take the synthetic material, which is a sheet, and I make it into a garment? I use ariga. So then would I be, with this four-cornered garment, be chayiv in tzitzis? According to Rabbi Moshe, no. Categorically, by definition, synthetic mesh is patim and tzitzis. Even if you make it into a beged, it doesn't help. And Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank disagrees and says that it's true in its original state you pater. However, in your original state you pater, but now that you made it into a beged, there's a dinner beged, and you can wear. So that's the major issue. Can one wear mesh, nylon, polyester, tzitzis or not? So it's interesting. The Torah said only if you're wearing a four-cornered garment you chayiv in tzitzis, but you're not obligated to put on a four-cornered garment. How come tzitzis is different? By tefillin, they don't give us a choice. You have to put on tefillin. You have to eat matzah. Why is the nature of the mitzvah of tzitzis different? So they point out that there's a O. Henry story. It talks about the clothes make the man. What is the story about? That there's the brain and the brawn, the smart guy and the big bruiser, and the brain came up with a great idea. He's going to break into a jewelry store. He's going to climb in at night, but he'll have his other partner put on a police uniform, and he'll walk around, and people will think the police already were called, and no one's going to call the police. So everything's going according to plan. He goes in. The big brawn guy, he just happens to take a walk down the block. He looks in the storefront window. He sees the reflection. Wow, this looks good on me. He really feels good about himself. He starts helping a lady across the road. He helps this person. And all of a sudden, he sees someone climbing out of the chimney in the jewelry store, and he screams, "Steve, Steve!" And that's what happens when you trust the brawn guy. And the bottom line was that once he put on the police uniform, he felt like a policeman. So the clothes make the man. That's the Shiloh. There's different types of clothing. There's one that's called beged, which from the word begida they rebelled. The other hand, malbush and lavush, like modesty. So Rav Tzedek Goin says, clothes tell you. If someone puts on a chassid uniform, does that make him a chassid? If someone puts on a army uniform, does that make him in the military? No. Rav Tzedek says it tells you nothing about the past, but perhaps it tells you something about the future, where you want to be heading. So specifically, and especially among clothes, that's something that you don't want to force upon a person to become another uniform. Specifically tzitzis, which represents beged. God's not looking for someone who has a 9-to-5 job and that's it. Okay, I'm coming because I have to. He wants someone to come in because they want to. He doesn't want someone wearing the beged of Hashem, the beged of tzitzis, because he has to. He wants them to wear the beged of tzitzis because he wants to be. And that's the sort of tzitzis. Tzitzis, which represents beged more than anything else. To force someone to put on a uniform is not meaningful. If a person on their own decide they want to dress a certain way, they want to put on the tzitzis and show they want to follow in God's way, so therefore he left it with the mitzvah of tzitzis, that tzitzis is optional. If you have an optional, you have a choice whether you want to wear a four-cornered garment or not. The Torah tells us when one is wearing a four-cornered garment, one is obligated in the mitzvah of tzitzis. One is not obligated per se to put on a four-cornered garment, but if one wears a four-cornered garment, then one is obligated in the mitzvah of tzitzis. So the question Rishonim, the Gemara deals with is, what kind of garment? So if you're wearing a four-cornered garment, you're obligated in tzitzis. But what kind of garment? What type of material? Is any garment, any type of material obligated in tzitzis? Or there are specific garments? That's a machlokas in the Gemara, in the Rishonim, the Machaber Ramah, Ashkenaz Svardim, on what type of beged is required to fulfill our mitzvah min haTorah of tzitzis. So, one opinion in the Gemara, and this is the sheet of the Machaber, is only wool and linen. That if you're wearing a four-cornered, and today we'll keep it just to wool, because linen is a different issue, since it's the issue of Techelles and everything else. So, from a practical point of view, if you're wearing the only way you can fulfill your mitzvah min haTorah of tzitzis is if you're wearing a four-cornered wool garment. If I'm wearing a four-cornered cotton garment, I'll get a mitzvah midrabanan, but I will not get my mitzvah min haTorah. So according to the Machaber, according to those Rishonim, it dafka has to be wool or linen, and our purpose is a wool garment. That's how you fulfill your mitzvah. The other Shitas in the Gemara, Rishonim, and the Shitas Harama, is afilu shar begadim, even other begadim, i.e. cotton, silk, what have you, one can fulfill the mitzvah min haTorah of tzitzis. It's working, it just says his name on it. One can fulfill his mitzvah min haTorah of tzitzis. The major machlokas Rishonim on whether one has to wear a wool garment or they could wear shar begadim. So the meaning when it comes to a talis gadol, everyone seems to agree. When it comes to a talis gadol, the meaning is that everyone wears a wool four-cornered garment and they put tzitzis on it. I haven't seen, it wouldn't shock me if there were others, but I haven't seen non-wool talis gadol. That's the accepted meaning everyone wears, but strictly speaking, if you had cotton, according to some, it might be okay. But the meaning is by a talis gadol, you wear a four-cornered wool garment. What about a talis katan? So, again, that comes down to machlokas, the Machaber Ramah. And the Machaber says you should wear a woolen garment because to get your mitzvah min haTorah. The Ramah says shar begadim. Interesting, the Bnei Brak, from what I hear, I haven't checked, but they wear cotton talis katan. What's going on? I thought they're into the chumras here. How come they're wearing a cotton talis katan and not a wool? So they say it's based on the Vilna Gaon. They say the Vilna Gaon wore a cotton beged. How come he wore a cotton beged? So he didn't tell us why, but his students and others speculate why he wore a cotton beged and not a wool beged. So one opinion is why he wore a cotton is it wasn't an issue of hilchot tzitzis, it was a din of hilchot shatnez. He was machmir on shatnez. Apparently during his day, I guess people had wool, linen, they used to wear linen shirts or something, or undershirts, whatever the case may be. He didn't want to put a wool beged directly on top of the linen, so therefore he was machmir and hilchos shatnez. That's how some learn. Others say that no, that wasn't the issue. The issue is he wore a talis gadol all the time, or at least he wore it during davening until he fulfilled his mitzvah min haTorah. But a talis katan, he wanted to get a kiyum derabanan. Whatever the lamdas you want to give, the bottom line is that the Vilna Gaon wore a cotton talis katan. On the other hand, Rav Moshe Feinstein always writes in his tuvas, and there's a famous picture of him in the Catskills wearing his big talis katan over his shirt. I should say his big woolen talis katan over his shirt. He used to always write, Bali Nefesh, should be machmir and wear wool, even though we pass in that a cotton is fine. So on one hand you have the Vilna Gaon and Bnei Brak being Mekel and not Mekel, but wearing Kain. Then you have Rav Moshe being Machmir. So it's Yesh v'Yesh when it comes to Talis Katan. When it comes to Talis Gadol, the minhag seems to be everyone wears a woolen four-corner garment. When it comes to a Talis Katan, different minhagim. So according to the Ramah, everyone agrees you can. According to the Machaber, so that it's more of an issue. So it's more of an Indian probably for Sfardim to wear a woolen Talis Katan than Ashkenaz, but different minhagim. And in fact, they discussed what about a four-cornered blanket. Speaking of sleeping, what about a four-cornered? Let's say someone comes to the shir. Maybe I should institute that when you might be comfy when you come. You should bring a four-cornered garment. You have to put tzitzis on the four-cornered garment, four-cornered blanket. So is blanket chayav in tzitzis to begin with? Because why would it be? Because there's an isser of shatnez. So by isser of shatnez, there are two ways to violate the prohibition. There is levisha, wearing shatnez, but then there's another isser of halah, wrapping yourself around. That's an isser of shatnez. The shaila is there a mitzvah of tzitzis? Are we machmer by tzitzis? That is tzitzis as well. It's clearly levisha. Is there a mitzvah if I'm wearing something wrapped around? Am I chayiv in tzitzis? So pashtus, no. It's a din in shatnez, not a din in tzitzis. However, the Magen Avram quotes a chumrah from a Rishon that says a four-cornered blanket is chayiv in tzitzis. So I've never seen a four-cornered garment, four-cornered blanket with tzitzis. No one would do that. If you're going to be machmir, you would round off the fourth corner and make it a round. That's what you would do. But is that the minhag? If you have a four-cornered blanket, so the chazan issue. So what's the issue? Number one, there's another famous machlokas when it comes to hilchas tzitzis. Because blanket is when do you usually sleep? At night. So the Torah says you're isamoso. So the Gemara says we learn out, the Laila is exempt from the mitzvah of tzitzis. So the question is, everyone agrees Laila is exempt. The question is, what does it mean Laila is exempt? So the Rambam, Maimonides, goes kapshuto, Laila, Yom versus Laila. Just like the mitzvah of lulav has to be done during the day, the mitzvah of shofar has to be done during the day, so to the mitzvah of tzitzis. There is no mitzvah at night of tzitzis. It doesn't exist. So according to the Rambam, most people sleep in the blanket. You're sleeping at night. I guess if you sleep past halos, you run into the shaila. But anyway, according to the Rambam, you're exempt at night. So according to the Rambam, it shouldn't be an issue. However, there's another sheet of Tosfos and the Rush. It doesn't mean Yom versus Laila. It means Beged Yom versus Beged Laila. So it means what type of Beged you're wearing. So if I'm wearing my pajamas even during the day, I'm exempt, because that's a Beged Laila. So if I'm wearing a Beged Yom at night, I'm chayiv, and it all goes on what type of Beged you're wearing. So therefore, according to the Rush, well, blanket's a Beged Laila, so therefore, perhaps you're chayiv. It's a Beged Laila, but so it's not a problem. Most people sleep at night, so therefore, both according to the Rush and the Rambam, you're patur. So either a Beged Laila blanket, or it's Laila. The shaila really is, if you take a nap during the day, you sleep during the day with a four-cornered blanket, then what's the issue? So the Chazon Ish has a chumrah. He says, if you sleep during the day with a woolen blanket, so then he says one could be machmir. Since wool is you definitely chayev in daraisa and putting on tzitzis. Everyone agrees wool's chayev in tzitzis. So he says you should round off the blanket to avoid the shaila. But he says since it's a machlokas rishonim in the Gemara, whether kain, silk, or other begadim achayev in tzitzis, there's no need. You don't have to be machmir on a non-woolen garment. Maybe you'd say a linen garment as well. But besides, so the minhag seems to be the whole thing's a chumrah to begin with. Pashish and a blanket is not chayev in tzitzis because it's not levisha. The Chazon Ish had a chumrah. I guess in Bnei Brak they wear a kan talis, but if they sleep during the day with the four-cornered wool garment, they round it off. So, and in fact, it's an interesting Taz. The Taz is in Hilchos Rosh Hashanah. He talks about the issue of wearing a talis at night. Why in Hilchos Rosh Hashanah would we be talking about a talis at night? Because there's something called slichos, we say, before and during the Yomim Noraim. So the Machaber brings down, when he's saying slichos, one should wear a talis. A talis kadar he's talking about, and based on a medrash, etc. So the issue is, most places, many places, or some places, do slichos at night. They start slichos, 1 in the morning, whatever the time, or some do it earlier. We're not getting into the appropriate time that we'll say for Elul time. But so the question is, what do you mean put on a talis? But it's nighttime. So do we wear a talis at night? So we said, according to the Rambam, you're exempt at night. There's no mitzvah. You're not gaining anything. It's a zman yapata from the mitzvah. It's like you don't blow shofar at night. And according to the Rush, it's a beged yom. A beged yom b'layla yechayev. So so you have to put on a talis according to the Taz without a bracha, because it's a safek brachas l'kula. It might be a bracha l'vatola. So the Taz says it's inappropriate to put yourself in a situation where you do a mitzvah and not make a bracha. The lechatchila, to put yourself in a situation. So he said it's not appropriate to put on a talis at night, because you're putting yourself in a situation where you're not going to make a bracha, because the safek bracha is kakot. So therefore, what does he say? He says, don't put on a talis? No. So he says, if you know daven slichos at night, one should be sure not to wear their own talis, because it has to be your talis to make a bracha, or that you borrow your friend's talis. And if you're going to use the shul talis, make sure you're not koner. Make sure you don't acquire it like it's yours, because in order to make a bracha, therefore he says one should do that. Because you should put a situation where there's no safek bracha. It's not the same, but we discussed a couple of weeks ago that the famous Shitas Harama and the meaning Ashkenaz regarding Birkas Kohanim, that really, strictly speaking, the chiyuv to do Birkas Kohanim is every day, once a day, and that's the minig in Eretz Yisrael, and some Sephardi Kehilas here. So how come the Rama writes, the minig Ashkenaz is only on the Shalosh Regalim, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, only then we do Birkas Kohanim. So the Rama writes something difficult. He says, since we're not shurim b'simcha, and that's the part that's not difficult, but we're not shurim b'simcha, he says it's inappropriate to do Birkas Kohanim. So the Kash is like, he means, but what about putting on tefillin? I'm up at Simcha this morning. He didn't have his cough. He's steaming. Maybe he should put on tefillin. So how come he doesn't say it by tefillin? Or I'm up at Simcha. Let's get rid of shofar today. So obviously, the Mefarshim point out, no, it's different, because really you only chayiv in Birkas Kohanim if the Kehillah calls you up. Kohanim, that's a separate child. There's only one Kohen. What do you do? Whether you say Kohanim, whether you say nothing, you definitely don't say Kohanim. Whether you say Kohen or whether you say nothing. But you get called up, so then you have to, whether Ashkenaz and a Sephardi shul, you have to go up also. So, but what's the plan in the Ramah? Since we're not sure in B'simcha, so our meaning is we don't want to have someone do a Birkas Kohanim, which is not Bishrei Musa. So similarly, the Taz is similar that we don't want to put someone in a situation where he's lechatchila getting into a safek bracha. So therefore, when you put on the talis, he says, make sure it's either the shul's talis and don't be koner, or wear a friend's talis.
It's like same as the night of Yom Kippur?
So they say, so by kol nidre, it'd be the same issue. That's why the meaning is, we do kol nidre, we start before shkia.
So you can
that's right, So one should be careful, that we should try to make sure you get your talis, make your bracha before shkia. But we start kol nidre usually 20 minutes before shkia, but it's the same issue. So wool, we said, everyone agrees to, you get the mitzvah min Torah, cotton and silk, and shar begadim, a machlokes rishonim, whether it's a deraisa or derabanan. What about a mesh tzitzis, or polyester?
Why is that different than the other?
Very, very good. You're asking all and it's without the cloth. You're still asking the right kashas. It's just automatic with you.
When did I get here?
So the Gemara talks about something else. The Gemara says, beged shel or. If you're wearing a leather garment, you putter. We're not getting into other issues, but the Gemara doesn't explain why. This says if you're wearing a beged shel or, it's pater min hatzitzis. So the question is why? So the Mefarshim say it's pater min hatzitzis because for it to be a beged, it has to be woven. I don't know, the whole wolf and the warp, there has to be a maisa rika involved. So or is one sheet, and therefore it doesn't have a din of a beged. It says o beged, o or. We're going to read everything in Chukas in a different context, but we see beged is one thing, or is something else. Or is not labeled as a beged. So the chiyuv is when a beged of dalad compost is chayav. So or has no din of beged because it doesn't have the technical din of arika. You can't. So okay, that's a given. The shaila is, what about today polyester or mesh? Where what is it? It starts off it's like a sheet, but then they turn it into a beged. Whether they do petroleum, other stuff, they make it into a beged. So the shaila is, what happened to something? I guess it'd be the same shaila with or. You took or, but then you made it into a beged. But here we're talking about mesh or polyester. So Rav Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva. He says no. Categorically, it's pater min hatzitzis. Once it starts off pater, even if you make it into a beged, it's exempt. And Rav Pesach Frank disagrees and says, once you make it into a beged, you chayav in tzitzis, so it's a machloket by mesh. So obviously, ideally, it's best to avoid that, because according to Rav Moshe, you're not getting your mitzvah of tzitzis, but you have Rav Pesach Frank to rely on even polyester mesh. You can fulfill your mitzvah of tzitzis. The Pasha's pointing to the Ramah, that it would be a din, your kiyam daraisa, at least for the Ashkenaz.